Greetings. Welcome to this week of History 231. We start with an image of Thomas Jefferson because we're going to talk about Jefferson this week. We'll talk about the new nation, and so we finished up the Constitution last week. I thoroughly appreciated your ideas on the Constitution and maybe even your defense of the Constitution. That's nice that you all seem to hold it in high regard, even with its limitations. And we'll continue to talk about those limitations as the quarter goes on, because there are certainly limitations that can be seen in some of the other themes that we'll develop throughout this quarter. So one of the themes that we're going to deal with this week then is the new nation. So you'll be looking into the early period of the national history, early national history, and we're going to look just at what happens when a young nation tries to sort of push itself to maturity. One of the people we will deal with this week is our third president, Thomas Jefferson. He is very glary on my iPad there, but Jefferson is nothing if not controversial. We'll talk about him in several different ways. One of the things to start with, though, in terms of understanding Jefferson, is that he comes into power as president through the election of 1800. So when he comes into the White House in 1800, he likes to talk about this as another revolution. So he'll actually call it the Revolution of 1800. He does some things that seem quite revolutionary when he comes into office. He will basically ban all internal taxes in the country. Did you hear that? Did you just become Jefferson fans? He bans all internal taxes. Yay! No whiskey tax. The U.S. citizens loved to get rid of the whiskey tax. He gets rid of all internal taxes, and he tries to get rid of the national debt by hiring or appointing as his Secretary of Treasury the Swiss-born and brilliant economist Albert Gallatin. They start working on the national debt and get it down from 14 trillion. I'm just kidding. That's today. Get it down from right around 100 million to closer to 20 million by 1808 when he leaves office. So they have incredible success with lowering the national debt, and then it might make you ask, wait, they get rid of taxes and get rid of debt? How do you do that? Don't you need taxes to pay off that debt? Well, that's a very good question. So he does some other things that seem revolutionary, and he calls all of this the Revolution of 1800. He at first gets rid of these payments to these pirates called the Barbary Pirates. He stops paying them off. He reduces the size of our military. He basically tries to decrease the size of government in every way. In reducing the size of the military, this is a good example of what Jefferson realizes will be an incredibly silly plan. But he replaces our whole Navy with this idea that we could have 13 gunboats that would protect our coast. So you don't need a big modern Navy, no big battleships, just 13 gunboats. And think about the size. Put that map in your head. You know that map we all keep in our head? Put that map in your head, or go find a map if you want. So the U.S. at this point goes from Maine all the way down to Florida, and then not Florida, because that's still Spain, but then you have to go around. See how we went around there? And come up on the other coast. So you're going to have to go in the Gulf of Mexico and protect that area also. So 13 gunboats are going to protect that whole thing. Well, this was absurd, but they started building the gunboats, and in 1804, the first 2 gunboats came off the line. Just in time. They just got placed in the water, and they're ready to go in Georgia, and the largest hurricane in American history hit. It was so large that at one point, the low tide in the hurricane was 10 feet higher than their highest recorded high tide. Think about that. Their low tide was 10 feet higher than they'd ever seen a high tide before. This was a massive hurricane. Gunboat 2 was entirely just smashed and destroyed. But Gunboat 1 did that strange thing that hurricanes sometimes do. It just lifted it up. It took it 8 miles inland, and it plopped it down right in the middle of a cornfield. Well, give it a couple weeks and the water recedes, and now you have gunboat number one right in the middle of a cornfield. The Federalists who are still around, remember Jefferson is a Democratic Republican, but eventually they would just usually call him a Republican. The Federalists who are still around in Congress just loved this. So Rufus King of New York says he raises a glass. He raises a glass at a Federalist function, and he says, "May our cornfields in Georgia forever be protected by gunboat number one." And so the Federalists love to make fun of this. They should have made fun of it. It was a ridiculous idea. Jefferson couldn't protect our ships out at sea. They were all vulnerable. They were all in trouble. What Jefferson very quickly realizes is that to have small government ideals, you had to have big government means. Other presidents would realize that also. If you want to really have constitutionally conservative ideals, it doesn't necessarily mean you do less as a governing body. It might mean you do more, but you put into place policies that ensure that government is not used in the same way. It's a strange thing, but Jefferson will actually realize to have this Jeffersonian small farmer agrarian ideal, you have to actually have more government. And you can see this with Louisiana Purchase, for instance. It's completely undemocratic, just sends two secret agents over to France to bid on this thing. There's nothing in the Constitution that says he can do this. When France ups the price, these guys automatically get millions more dollars, and they're able to get a magnificent purchase, don't get me wrong, but it's not democratic, it's not small government. But Jefferson realizes to have small government ideals or goals, you have to have big government means. And so Jefferson would also eventually support the bank, which he thought was absolutely evil in the 1790s. But he realizes banks are good for farmers also. And he would eventually raise a high tariff. That's another sort of accession, and he gives in to that. So we have Jefferson to deal with. Other people were very much afraid that this was a revolution, even though we know it really wasn't. It was a smooth transition of power. The government, the hands that held the government went from being Federalist to being Republican, and there was no violence in the streets. The system held up, and in fact, what we know now is this American system, except for an occasional major hiccup, like the Civil War, it is amazingly resilient. If you want to get something done here, if you want to really have a progressive agenda, good luck, because one person described that as trying to walk through a vat of molasses. It is a very difficult system to work in if you want to change the system. That's also its beauty, is that it's not like other constitutions around the world that seem to come and go at the whim of a military that might have too much power. So that's on the Jefferson side. Another Jefferson idea, though, will get us toward your reading this week. So you'll have no, you won't have a short reading. You'll have the little videos thing on the early nation. And then the other reading that we'll do this week is the narrative of Frederick Douglass. So we'll have 2 weeks to read this. So this week and next, start in on this. And here is what I want you to, dang it, I was fidgeting and I lost my place. Wait there. Okay, thank you. You're still there? All right. So what I want you to look for in this is very simple and straightforward. The way you read this book, you're not taking very sort of detailed and copious notes on the thing. You read it as the brilliant literature that it is. It's a classic in American history, and it is much more readable than Common Sense and Ben Franklin. I apologize that those are difficult reads. This is not such a difficult read. This one, you will be, you'll laugh, you won't laugh, but you'll cry, you'll be angry, and you'll really get into the ideas of the book. That's a mild promise. So, what I want you to look for is very simple. What holds Frederick Douglass in slavery more firmly? Psychological chains or physical chains? Is he physically beaten down and kept enslaved by that? Or is he psychologically beaten down and kept enslaved by that? So think about that as you move into the book. Take a few notes here and there. Jot down a page number that might have something on that. I want to give you just a very brief section here because it'll show you what a brilliant writer this is. And in fact, Frederick Douglass is such a brilliant writer. In my opinion, he sometimes does a disservice to our understanding of slavery because we tend to think, oh, you've just come out of slavery, you should sound just like Frederick Douglass. Well, nobody sounds like Frederick Douglass. The man is a genius. He's absolutely brilliant. That's one of the ways he's able to escape slavery is because he's so smart. So we expect all slaves to sort of come out of slavery into Reconstruction and, you know, why don't you go pen your great narrative of your life? And most of them would say, I can't read, I can't write. It was illegal to read or write. So Frederick Douglass gives us that great insight. But remember, most slaves are not Frederick Douglass. So here's what he says about Christmas. It was deemed a disgrace not to get drunk at Christmas, and he was regarded as lazy indeed who had not provided himself with the necessary means during the year to get whiskey enough to last him through Christmas. So think about this system. It's a system where you as a slave are supposed to be saving money away during the year. And yes, many slaves did get a small, it would be akin to an allowance rather than a wage. But you're supposed to be setting aside money. Why? To what end? To get whiskey at Christmas. So you can get drunk at Christmas. And Frederick Douglass, what he sort of implies at this part is very, very sort of deeply intelligent. He says, or he doesn't say, but basically, Christmas, getting drunk at Christmas is liberty for slaves. It's what they associate with liberty. Then you have to think, what does liberty have? Well, liberty has a hangover. If you get drunk, and it's really the only time of the year you're getting drunk, the next day you have a hangover. Liberty is getting in drunken brawls on the plantation. It's having wild parties at Christmas, your one time of year, and the slave owners engineer it that way is sort of what he implies. It is supposed to be an engineered part of the system that keeps slaves in their place. So there are all sorts of little tidbits here. So I want you to look for that this week. Look for the psychological and the physical sort of methods of keeping slaves in their slavery. And try to decide what's more powerful. What would have a more potent effect on you? Would it be psychological trauma, or the threat of more psychological damage, or would it be the threat of physical trauma, of actually a beating coming to visit you every day? What would be worse? What would hold you in place more? And so think about that as you get into this fabulous book this week. And I will leave it at that. And I will tell you, go off, enjoy it. Read it as you would a great novel. It's not a novel. It's a narrative. It's an autobiography. But read it as you would a great novel. Think about it. Read for a little while. Think. Write a little bit. Ask a question. Think some more. Read some more. And but most of all, just have a good week.